two extraordinary women, pioneers in every sense of the word in this field, who have been in public sector, private sector, and nonprofit sector, bringing leadership to all of what we do and all of what we are trying to do in ways that I don't think we can even begin to measure. So please join me in welcoming to the stage the president of Ceres, Mindy Luber, and from the board of directors of Interface, Dianne Dillon-Ridgley. Welcome. Thank you, Dianne.
I'm sitting to your right, I'm told. Oh, well, okay, I'm not sitting to your right.
Oh, sit where they told me.
She told me to sit. Women
All right,
always
guys,
doing the furniture.
Trying to get our seating straight. Great. Good morning, folks. Great to be here. As Joel just said, the weather on the East Coast, I'm in from Boston, Diane's in from Iowa, but I left not only polar vortex type freezing weather, but 8 feet of snow lining every inch of Boston, and we'll be heading back. So for anyone who's not in Boston, you've got it good right now, and we'll keep you posted if we ever dig out. It's delightful to be here, not only because of the weather, but the weather absolutely does help, and I should have booked an extra day. It's nice to be able to celebrate Joel's birthday. Joel, I know you partied last night, but today's the real day, so from all of us, happy birthday. That was pretty good. They had the music teed up, and I didn't even say I was going to mention it. Good logistics, for sure. We're going to talk today, and I'm going to introduce myself very briefly and introduce Dianne very briefly, but we're going to talk about the role of boards. I mean, without question, we've all collectively seen sustainability move from a special project, a cute and special initiative, to something where 10 years ago, CSR officials were compliance officers to keep companies out of trouble, perhaps, comply with all those rules of all those agencies, but not thinking about sustainability systemically from the boardroom to the supply chain. I think the good thing, and I know Joel opened up with, we haven't seen as much progress as we would like, and the state of green business is okay, but we need to ramp up, and I would agree with that. But I do not want to underestimate the changes we've all seen, the changes you've all been responsible for, and the systems approach that leadership companies, large companies, more often than not, are starting to take. So my view is we've made great progress. It's no longer board members rolling their eyes when I'm in their boardroom talking about the risks of climate and the opportunities, or the risks of diversity and ignoring it and the opportunities. It's a very different world, and for that I'm delighted, I'm grateful, we are making progress. But we do have a long way to go. So I want to introduce us and then dig right into one important piece of that systems approach, and that being governance. For those of you who I don't know, and I'll rudely quickly get through me so we can go to Dianne, who's far more important in this discussion. My name's Mindy Luber. I run Ceres, an organization that works with so many of you in the room. We work with leadership companies and many others to integrate sustainability systematically from the boardroom to the supply chain. And we work with 110 investors whose assets total about $8 trillion to do the same as it relates to their financial commitments. It is about risk and opportunity. That's what drives capital markets, and that's where we have to take a deeper dive. But sitting to my right, Dianne Dillon-Ridgley. Dianne is somebody I've known for several decades. She has been a leader on more things than I can imagine and more things that I'm going to be able to talk about, but a true sustainability leader in the private and the public sector, truly defining sustainability in the broadest way that it should be. It is not about environmental metrics. It is about changing systems in a broad way, looking at human rights, looking at the environment, looking at diversity, and how they add up to change a company. A true thought leader, Dianne has been on the board of 2 important companies, Green Mountain Energy, and on Interface's board for 18 years. She just rotated off. She's the executive director of the Women's Network for Sustainable Future and the chair of the Center for International Law. So Dianne, It's a privilege to have you here, and no doubt you could share lots of thoughts with us today. So let me dig in. We know that for the lawyers and us and those of us who have been through the arcane years of law school and others, if you read literally the role of a fiduciary, a board member of a large company or a board member of any company, is to analyze risk and responsibility, but to analyze risk and to know how to act on it. And of course, that sounds great. But the risks of sustainability issues have heretofore been considered off-balance sheet risks, not the real financial risks, and haven't always made it to the boardroom. Our goal is to think about, in a really tangible way, how to put the issues of sustainability on a board agenda, not because it's trendy, not because we've got special interests, but these are not off-balance sheet risks. They belong on a board agenda. A material risk is a core duty. We're not quite there. When Ceres studied about 650 companies in the Russell 1000, we found that despite the fact that there are more boards beginning to address sustainability, it hasn't always produced change in the company. Dianne has lived that world. So I'm going to just open it up and ask Dianne, how did you interact with boards in the two companies you were at? What made sustainability rise to the level of the board? And how did it actually work and play out?
Well, I've actually been on a couple of other boards, but these are the two that are most relevant and most germane. And being on the board of Interface, and a number of people in the room will all remember Ray Anderson. And when Ray tendered the offer of being on the board, his question was, I want you to come help me change the world. That's not the normal question when you're being asked to be on a NASDAQ board. But Ray was very different. And it speaks to who happened to be the champions inside a particular company as it is embarking on how it changes itself. Now, 20 years later, we also have companies that have formulated their entire processes and structures with sustainability already in place, so they're not retrofitting companies. And the thing I think, there are literally courses that are going on about all of this, and we've got a very finite amount of time in which to focus on it. But the thing I would say is that I think ultimately sustainability as a word will fall away. It is a proxy word, and I think one of the ways in which to engage the board members and the financial side, particularly of a company and its operations, is to use sustainability as a proxy for risk. And those things that are the greatest risk for many companies right now are, in fact, those things that are the most relevant and germane to what we, who have been focusing on sustainability for so long, have talked about. But there are differences if you're in an extractive company or if you're in one that is primarily consumer-based or if you're in a knowledge company. So the differentiations between different kinds of companies, which puts them at different places in the spectrum of progress. The other thing I would say, and this is my main point for this session in terms of board members, to me, one of the hardest things to do, and one of the most important things to do, is to get sustainability moved from being another box that gets checked in the things that demand board attention. As you noted in your report from 2010, that's her plug. In this post-Sarbanes-Oxley world, we really need to have sustainability in those issues as the lens through which the company views all of its operations, not another box that it checks of we've got that done, we're okay, and what's next. It becomes the raison d'etre of how the company looks at its operations.
Well, I mean, common sense is all too good of a thing, and that, of course, makes great common sense. And I will say, we've seen a trend. We've seen almost no boards looking at sustainability now to about 25% of the boards looking at sustainability. And Dianne's wisdom for sure is this is not a special issue to look at. It is a board's duty to understand and analyze risk, as we opened up, for any company dealing with climate change, dealing with water shortages, dealing with reputational risk, dealing with supply chain problems, dealing with diversity issues. Those are core risks to a company and need to be elevated to the board, or so those in the room here think. But it doesn't always happen. So perhaps we could drill down, and we're doing a study now trying to drill down and talking to dozens and dozens of board members about the reality of how to make it happen. I mean, we certainly hear Sarbanes-Oxley demands boards look at these 27 new things, and extractive industries have new rules, and boards meet for 2 hours every quarter. How could we possibly look at now climate change and water shortages and supply chain risks? How have you managed to bump these risks into the priority list when there are so many competing interests for a board of directors?
Well, I've never been on the board that meets just for the 2 hours every quarter. If you're on a board, I mean, there are varying amounts of compensation. Most things make it sound like you're getting rich. There's a lot of personal risk. You pretty much need to actually get your own outside counsel in terms of just protecting yourself for being on that. But again, another discussion.
Great incentive to get on the board.
No, I pay for that.
No, I hear you. Not, I meant the disincentive.
Yes, but what I would say to what you just said is, it's not just bumping it up, it's how do we do what we do. The one thing I would say is I've noticed some trends that are happening. More and more companies are declining to give guidance in terms of the street, in terms of what they're doing. One, and you know, a lot of things are sort of coming together that haven't necessarily been viewed in the realm of sustainability, but if you step back and think about it, they are in a way. So this I won't say reluctance to give guidance, it's not about being secretive as much as it is about how do we deal with the issues around transparency and make sure that that on which you do give guidance, you can support. I find that actually can push a board and push a company to actually be better in terms of sustainability. Looking through and beginning to think about, and it's all about what questions you ask. Think about, you know, how do you look at your supply chain? Where do you have the capacity to even have the control or have the knowledge in terms of that? The complexities for particularly consumer companies, the complexities for extractive industries, these are all mounting. And one of the things that I think is most important is to have people on the board who have the courage, the chutzpah, whatever phrase you want to use, to be willing to ask the questions. If I thought I was on a board where it was just primarily, you know, yes man, you know, and I say man advisedly, and just, you know, letting things go, I would run from that situation. It's a tremendous responsibility. Obviously, in terms of public boards, there's a major legal infrastructure that has been married to the fact that you have this public trust, so it has a responsibility that goes with that. And I think those of us who have worked long and hard on these issues of sustainability see this as the democratizing of capitalism in a way that I don't think we even necessarily thought about that in the earlier days of doing this. I often use a metaphor that many of us came through different doors. Perhaps the majority of us in this room and people who were early on came through an environmental door, but many have come through a social lens door, have come through a door that is focused on human rights, who've come through a door that is just on better practices, you know, in terms of, you know, financial management. But we're all now in this room and in this space together. And to me, that's why it's so important to use sustainability as that opportunity for that lens, to be able to manage the operations of the company in a way that is far healthier.
Great. Let's follow that up with 2 or 3 things that relate to it, and let's see, as you were talking. I mean, one is, do we need more expertise? I know that Prudential, as an example, now requires somebody to be on their board with a sustainability background, expertise. Now, maybe that's the right thing, maybe that's not, but we want to make sure that not only do we concur and all walk out of here believing that sustainability issues ought not be in a separate bucket, there are risks that need to be integrated into the core work and the core duties of a board, but thinking about how to make it happen. I mean, after all, the board set the agenda. They set the big picture for a company. Is it expertise? Is it more support? I mean, one thing we're seeing is some of the largest investors, New York City Comptroller's Office and many other investors, have basically said to boards, we want you to choose board members that have an expertise and know how to look at climate change and water shortages and diversity. How are we going to truly get a much more sharp focus on these issues at the board level?
Well, this is a larger discussion even beyond sustainability in terms of the issue of diversity on boards in general. I don't know why I always pick on MIT, but I do. I said, you know, if everybody on the board all went to MIT and they all got their engineering degree and then they all, you know, became CFOs and they all sit in the room, they can be wonderful people. But you've got 12 people sitting in the room that have a relatively narrow set of parameters that they have the capacity to use to deal with stuff. So this speaks to the very issue of why it is important to have diversity of all kinds on the board. I mean, if we look at the schools, we used to be on the Second Nature board as well, and we've done a lot of work on changing the template about education, higher education in terms of sustainability. And so there isn't a singular certified it for in terms of what's the sustainability expertise. So there's a wide variance there. But certainly in that need and effort on the part of the boards to have a broader, more diversified representative of stakeholders as what, you know, investors. I mean, one of the things about Interface, I just will say this one thing I meant to say. I think one of the reasons Interface was able to do as much as it did as early as it did was obviously you had the founder who was CEO and then chairman of the board. And that, in any room, that's going to give that person an extra amount of leverage. That's just reality. We also we were highly comprised of institutional investors. At one point, I think it was almost 80% of our shares were held by institutions. And institutional investors are not really traders, so they're not necessarily interested in turning things over that quickly. And we had the advantage of being early in an industry that had been really pretty dirty. And so we had first mover. So when you begin to unpack and analyze these things, I think one of the things that the companies that intend to do this have to look at where are their individual advantages, where do they have specific opportunities structurally, and how do they capitalize on those? Where do they have strengths inside their board? Where do they have gaps, or where can they have an added strength? And who might they need to bring on board in order to be able to do that? But you're absolutely right. I've been in settings where I've seen something proposed. This was in another board that actually never went public, but I saw something proposed and realized, I'm trying to figure out how to say this carefully, but in that room, if the board hadn't made the decision that it did, foundations were going to be petitioned by environmental NGOs. Months and months of energy and effort was going to be expended in mounting campaigns to counteract a bad decision that could have been made. The board, fortunately, made the right decision, and you saw within about 90 seconds an issue that could have been years of bad action, and I say counterproductive, just go away. So it has always impressed me how critical it is that you have in that room making those decisions people who bring the courage in many instances, as well as the wisdom needed to, as my grandmother would say, speak truth to power.
Well, I think that certainly is music to everybody's ears, and I doubt we have any doubters in this room that boards that have some amount of diversity, expertise in areas beyond CFO kind of issues, as the example you gave, are better suited and better able to do what they need to do, analyze risk, think about the direction of the company. And there's no doubt, given the folks that we talk to every day, that investors are watching or caring or engaging, are saying to publicly traded companies, we need to see more diversity. Diversity is defined because that's what a well-managed company has, diversity to make smart decisions. Let's talk a little bit more, dig in a little bit more about the role of management, both going up and down from the board. I mean, boards are busy. There are dozens, if not hundreds, of issues that people would like to see on the agenda of boards, whether it's 2 hours or 8 hours, and good to raise that. There are limits. So what do you see as the role of management in terms of raising the issues? Are we seeing enough opportunities where management is putting on the board agenda the issues of water risk or natural resource depletion or diversity risk? And are those discussions happening more than they were 5 years ago?
Well, since she just made me, queen of the world, at least the financial world.
And you should be. You've got my vote.
I mean, it is really difficult to speak about all companies. But I would say best-in-class companies absolutely are doing that. I mean, it's just in their own self-enlightened interest. I could take double hulling of oil tankers.
The start of series, the Valdez principles.
Yes. I mean, Elizabeth Holtzman, when she was the head of the New York City State School, blah, 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 one of those. She really had pushed as an issue that the oil companies should have done that double hulling. Now, she pushed it as an environmental issue initially, and it didn't necessarily have leverage from that. When she, and you'll notice how many times I say she, but we'll leave that part alone right now. When it became an issue in terms of their liability and what happened in terms of insurance, then it began to have a different kind of leg. So I think one of the things that many of us as professionals have to do in these settings is find different ways of talking about the same issue so that we can achieve them. So that's why I make the point about risk being a good proxy for sustainability, because no one sits on a board, a public board, without understanding that you are responsible for making sure that you have done your due diligence to make sure the company is not exposed to extra risk.
Minimizing risk, indeed, a fiduciary duty. Let me ask you one more question, and then, Lauren, I'm going to see if there are questions from the room. We talked a little bit about management raising the issues of risk that sustainability issues broadly defined have long been passed off-balance sheet risks. They are not off-balance sheet risks. They are on-balance sheet risks. There are numbers that could be applied to the risk of having a supply chain where workers are treated poorly and fires breaking out, and we've seen what's happened there, or having a problem where you're not anticipating water risk and agricultural facilities are losing billions of dollars and farmland and workers. So these are very real risks. They're on-balance sheet risks, and they rise to the fiduciary level, and we're seeing more of those issues rise up. To think about how to move it in the other direction, meaning boards set directions for companies. That's their role. They can't do all the details. They can't manage what each of us do on Friday at 2 o'clock, but they set the details and the big picture goals. We're starting, and I'd say only starting, to see boards setting goals around sustainability that are starting to tie compensation to those goals.
Absolutely.
Just like there are compensation goals for how many products or what the revenue streams are. I think we need to see not 20, but maybe one or so compensation metric designed around sustainability. I mean, we know that people want to get paid for doing their good work. They do what they're paid to do. How much are you seeing that, and how will that change the formula?
Well, nothing changes anyone's attention than changing their pay structure. If you demand it, people will comply. Because people like to get paid. They work hard and they like to get paid.
Absolutely, and deserve to.
And I do want to get to the question, so I think you framed the question such that it is actually the answer. And yes, I'm seeing that more and more. The one thing I say is that people who have been on, there were committees internally, audit committee, nominating committee, governance, and compensation. I mean, all the committees are important, but different ones have had different things. The real estate on which people sit, because sometimes you would go on a board and they say, well, we're not so sure about her, so we'll put her on this soft committee. Well, we saw how well that went when they put a lot of people on audit committee who didn't ask tough questions. Well, there are no committees where people sit that they don't ask tough questions now, and people are tying compensation, and nothing gets your attention like tying your compensation to that. And external training for boards, the conversations that exist between board members. I happen to go every year to the African Americans who sit on publicly traded boards, get together every September. And it is a really healthy environment because you can help prod, you can ask questions among yourselves to find out what is your company doing from very disparate, different kinds of companies. And so I think it is taking this role of being the fiduciary and being the responsible entity in terms of a company much more seriously.
Perfect, great. Lauren, any questions for us before I try and wrap all of this up?
Yeah, we do have time for one question, and we're getting a lot of interest in this topic, so thank you both. We have a viewer who's asking if you have any advice on particular metrics or data that can help inform a board, in particular if you're looking to get past the political rhetoric that can accompany climate issues, in particular in the US.
Well, it is about exactly the word you use, data. I mean, running to a board and saying, we need to campaign based on climate change because it's morally right and it's about the future of our world, which it is, and that's important, but that is not the role of a board. The board needs to be looking at the material risks that run to the company whose board they're on. And so if it's an agricultural company, you certainly want to be looking at water risks. If it's a winery, you want to be looking at water risks. If it's a farm, you want to be looking at water risks. Or think about diversity. Think about supply chain. If you are a manufacturer and not analyzing where your suppliers are finding their workers and how they're treating those workers, those are issues that can be documented. There's data based on how many workers, how they're treated, what they're being paid, what kind of audits have been done, what kind of supplier codes of conduct do you expect of those suppliers. These are metrics-driven issues, and a board should not be asked to look at them for any other purpose. But I would say for any of the issues that Dianne and I have talked about, those issues are metrics-driven. They are on-balance sheet risks in today's world.
I agree.
Okay, we're down to, Lauren, do we have time for one more, or shall I wrap?
I think we're unfortunately having to wrap up.
We're over.
Okay, we're over. The quick wrap is the following. This is an important frontier, as we've just talked to hundreds or dozens and dozens of board members, and we've got a paper coming out. It is no longer a question of should boards be looking at sustainability. They should. When there are material risks, that's a fiduciary duty. I think the questions are how. And I think looking at expertise on boards, hearing from investors, where we're hearing every day, they want boards to be diverse so they can manage the company in a way that the investors need to have it managed. Having metrics that go both ways, having management bringing issues up, but compensation, as Dianne just said, for the leadership of a company on sustainability goals is a good place to start. So we'll look forward to working with all of you as we raise sustainability issues to the board level at your companies. Thank you very much. Thank you, Dianne.
Thank you.